You know that feeling you get when you see something that you weren't supposed to see? That gut-wrenching churn that you feel in the pit of your stomach when you realize you can't unsee whatever it is that you witnessed. That feeling where it almost feels like you've made a mistake by witnessing whatever it was. But yet, it was completely beyond your control. Yeah, I know that feeling. In fact, I've definitely seen something that I shouldn't have. And now, that something is watching me. I doubt I have much time, so I'll try to make this quick. I don't know what use it is to me to give you any warning. Should you find yourself in my situation, there's nothing you can do anyway. At least, nothing that I know of. I don't know why it chose me. I don't know why it chooses anyone. But should it choose you, the only thing you can do is pray that you manage to avoid looking at it, no matter how hard it tries to get your attention. I don't know when or how it first saw me. I guess probably one of my many nights that I was walking home late after class, when I cut through the park by the lake. That's where it seems to be most of the time. So if at all possible, avoid that park. Or any park at night, I guess. That seems like a pretty good rule of thumb to follow anyway. So it shouldn't be too difficult for you to follow it. But whenever it was that it actually saw me, must have been when it chose me. I don't know if it chose me because I took that route on a regular basis or if I'm just unlucky. But either way, all it took was 2 weeks of me taking that same way home every night before it had made its decision. At the 2-week mark is when it decided that I was its target. Target probably isn't a good word for it. Prey is a more appropriate term. That night felt just like any other night. I was exhausted from a long day and had my earphones in as I made my way through the park. The park has a lot of trees along the lake and sidewalk. Not enough to be considered a forest or anything, but enough that against the dim glow of the street lamps, they created dozens and dozens of tall, dark silhouettes. It was a little eerie, but it wasn't enough to keep me from taking that way home for the last 2 weeks straight. On that particular night, about halfway through the park, is when it first tried to get my attention. It started with a sound that made me take out my earphones, confused, and I was searching all around me for the source. Have you ever been wearing earphones or headphones and you thought you heard someone say your name, but you just couldn't tell for sure? That's what it was like. It was subtle, but enough for me to notice and stop in my tracks. I can't really describe what the noise was. It sounded like a whisper, but I couldn't make out any of the words. The sound was gone as soon as I took my earphones out, and after a quick 360 to assess my surroundings, I came to the conclusion that my mind was playing tricks on me due to exhaustion. A little spooked, I made the second half of my trip through the park a lot quicker than the first. The next night was different. My morning classes had been canceled, so I wasn't nearly as exhausted on the trip home. My mind was on the new video game I had tucked into my backpack that I was planning on tearing into when I got back home. I didn't have my earphones in this time. So you can imagine my discomfort when I heard that sound again. The bizarre part about it was that even without the earphones, the sound was exactly the same. Something resembling quiet murmuring. Just slightly too low to make out the words. It was so brief, like someone saying my name to try and get my attention, but so quickly and quietly that I just couldn't be certain. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and I cautiously looked to the left and right of me, expecting to see a hobo or possibly just someone on their smartphone, mumbling under their breath to themselves as they lost yet another game of Words with Friends. When I didn't see anyone, I got the ominous feeling that I was being watched. Thoroughly freaked out, I slowly took a step forward to continue my journey. Without skipping a beat, the sound of a branch snapping on the ground echoed about 200 feet behind me, off to the side of the walkway. Now, genuinely frightened, I began to sprint as fast as I could from the source of the noise. After putting an additional 50 feet between me and the noise in question, I made the mistake of turning around to look behind me. Although it was too far to see clearly, I was able to make out a tall, thin figure against the glow of the street lamp that it stood under. From as far away as I was, it could have looked like a person, but I didn't give it a second thought as I booked it out of the park. Little did I know, That first glimpse was enough for it to get closer to me the next time around. I got out of class early the next day, and chalking last night's events up to either my imagination or some weirdo who wanted to sell me drugs in the park, I decided that since it was still daylight, that it would be safer for me to take my normal route home. I figured there'd be people in the park at that time of day, and no shadows to play tricks on my mind. Feeling totally at ease, I decided to swing by the ice cream cart that the local sweet little old ice cream man would push around the lake during the afternoon. I ordered my favorite, an ice cream sandwich, but felt a cold shiver run down my spine as the old man lifted the shiny glass cover of his cart to retrieve it. That familiar, unsettling noise echoed through my ears, and in the reflection of the glass, I caught a glimpse of the same tall, dark figure from the night before. This time, about 150 feet away from me. I froze, terrified for the brief few seconds that the old man had the cover of the cart lifted to retrieve my ice cream. My mind scrambled to remember what I had seen, but what my memory provided back to me didn't really seem humanly possible. The figure was easily 8, maybe 9 feet tall. Whoever or whatever it was dressed in a long black cloak, for lack of a better word. The face was the hardest part to remember. By this point, I still hadn't focused on its face. Not that it made a difference. My thoughts raced, trying to comprehend why the ice cream guy wasn't freaking out with me at whatever the thing was standing behind me was. The old man cheerfully handed me my purchase, raising an eyebrow and asking me if I was okay. I guess I must have nodded because he didn't press the issue. After a short moment of silence, and no terrified reaction to anything behind me from the ice cream cart man, I mustered the courage to look behind me. Nothing. I took my ice cream and proceeded on my walk home, my brain reeling for an answer as to what just happened. I took note that finals were next week and dutifully chalked up the alleged hallucinations to the underlying stress. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, but it never quite went away, even after I made it home. I didn't know why, but I had felt like something had followed me home. I wasn't as lucky the next evening. The park was closed for maintenance, my second option being to walk around the outside of the fence, an extra 20-minute walk down a quiet thoroughfare with an iron fence on one side and a poorly lit street on the other. I let out an aggravated sigh and began to make my way along the fence. I wish I had remembered my earphones instead of leaving them at school, because after 10 minutes of walking in silence, a sound made my stomach sink. It started out so softly that I didn't hear it over the sound of myself walking. But eventually, it became audible enough that I could clearly make out what it was. The sound of a hard object being dragged slowly across the iron bars of the fence. One by one. Slowly, but quickly enough to match the pace that I was walking, only about 100 feet behind me. I didn't turn to look back, but the hair on the back of my neck told me that something was there. As soon as I stopped walking, the clanging behind me stopped as well. My heart was pounding so quickly that I couldn't even breathe. I don't know which was worse, knowing that something was behind me but not what it was, or the idea of turning around and actually seeing it with my own eyes. Deep down, I had a sinking feeling in my stomach about what I would find if I turned around, and not a single fiber of my being wanted anything to do with whoever or whatever it was. But the decision was made for me, it seems. Out from the silence from behind me, a new noise, similar to the murmurs from before, filled my ears, draining my face of color. A low, gurgling moan like the wail of torment from someone drowning echoed from behind me. Instinct caused me to quickly turn and evaluate the source of the noise. And what I saw instilled a terror in me that I didn't think was possible. The feeling that I talked about earlier. The feeling of seeing something that you shouldn't have. That's the feeling that rushed over me as I stared at the creature in front of me. I had focused on the face this time, but out of the corner of my eye, I could see the long, thin black arms that hung almost to its knees. Attached to those arms were hands with thin, bone-like fingers, easily 3 to 4 times longer than any human I had ever seen. Even though it was draped in a cloak, I could tell the body was inhumanly thin and the proportions were all unnatural. The torso and legs were ghastly and long. The creature's posture looked crooked, as if it had a kink or a hunch in its back that caused its shoulders to hang forward in front of its face. And its face, if it even can be called that. The first thing I saw were the eyes. Small, very small, tiny, beady little white eyes sunken into large gaping black holes. The top of the creature's face was covered by what looked to be a mask made to resemble a white porcelain doll, but cracked in half, missing everything from the nose downward. Around the eyes and the eye holes of the mask were cartoonishly painted black eyelashes, like the ones you'd see on a Raggedy Ann toy. But the mask and the eyes beneath were nothing compared to the horror that hung beneath them. A grotesque abomination of a mouth hung loosely from the edge of the mask. It swung freely, as if the creature's jaw had been severed on both sides, allowing it to fall open, revealing a crudely removed tongue and 3 rows of human teeth along the bottom of the jaw. Behind the mask and around the mouth was smooth black skin, torn brutally around where the jaw was once connected to the skull of whatever it was. From the nightmarish orifice it had for a mouth, the gurgling moan emanated once again, still resembling a wail of despair. The sound was enough to snap me out of my state of shock, because I was able to realize that the creature had begun moving towards me. Its movements made my stomach churn. The sound of bone on bone and every joint in the creature's body popped and jerked in various directions, growing louder as it closed the distance between us. My fight or flight instinct finally switched into gear, and I turned and bolted in the opposite direction. But not before the thing had closed another 50 feet of the remaining 100-foot gap between us. That's when the realization had finally sunk in. The longer I look at it, the closer it would get to me. And it was doing whatever it could to get me to look at it. I kept running towards where I thought would be the safest. Downtown. Lots of people around, even at night. I didn't know if this thing cared about witnesses, but suddenly my memory was brought back to the incident the day before with the ice cream man in the park. It became obvious that it could only be seen by whoever or whatever it wanted to see it, which in this case, regrettably, was me. I made it to the heart of downtown, stopping to catch my breath outside a trendy nightclub with a long line of people waiting outside to get in. I leaned on the wall of the building on the opposite side of the entrance from where the line was formed. After a few moments of gasping for air and getting my heart rate under control, I turned to look at the line of people, hoping to see someone that I recognized, or maybe a police officer nearby that might help me out. Instead, amidst the line of people, what caught my eye were those cold, piercing white eyes, and that smooth, haunting porcelain face. It towered high above any of the other patrons. Its blank stare fixed on me from behind the people. It began to move alongside the line of people, barely giving me a chance to react, before it had closed another 25 feet. By the time I stopped looking at it, it was only about 25 feet away, making that stomach-churning wailing noise. It gained another 5 feet when I accidentally turned and saw its reflection in the side mirror of a taxi parked outside the nightclub. Fast forward to now. I had made it all the way back home, but it gained another 5 feet when I saw it standing in the yard outside my bedroom window. If it keeps moving at the same pace, then I estimate I only get one more look before it gets me. You see, I've locked myself in the bathroom, and the door faces the mirror. So no matter what I do, whether I walk backwards or forwards out of here, I'm sort of out of luck. I can hear the noise coming from outside the door. And even if I do make it out of this room, it's only a matter of time until I pass by a reflective surface. So, hopefully this message reaches you before it's too late, if you find yourself in the same situation. And also be sure to mind your manners. It's not very polite to stare